everybody hear me all right? Great. Don't what? Okay. Well, thank you very much for attending the first Dr. Frank Bicknell Memorial Lecture of the 2009-2010 season. Before we start, though, I just wanted to remind you of a few things. We have our second Saturday events. The next one is well, actually it's on Friday and Saturday, October 9th and 10th. It's Talking Heads, co-sponsored by the Grosse Pointe Theater. Right? And it'll be over at St. Paul's Cemetery, and of course there'll be period actors speaking about the people that are buried at those headstones. Then on, go ahead. And bring your own chairs. Okay, good. And dress for weather, right? Okay, good. Thank you. Our next program after that is Saturday, November the 14th, genealogy workshop co-sponsored by the Louisa St. Clair chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Also, of course, the Provençal Warehouse, our house museum, is open the second Saturday of each month from 1 to 4 p.m. for tours. And there's also the archives or Ruth and Al Moran Resource Center, which is open Tuesdays and Wednesdays from 10 to 12:30 and 1:30 to 4 p.m. Future Bicknell lectures we've scheduled through the fall, include the Guardian Building Cathedral Finance on Wednesday, October 21st, co-sponsored by the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. They'll be here in the auditorium. Jim Totis, the former Associate Curator of American Art at the DIA and Humanities Department Professor at Wayne State, will present a program relating to his book, again, the Guardian Building Cathedral Finance. And the Grosse Pointe is behind the company that created this massive work of art. Of course, it's probably the most recognizable structure built in the 1920s in Detroit, and now then known as the Union Trust Building, now known as the Guardian Building. Our last program of this year will be Saunders Confectionery, based on the book Saunders Confectionery, and that'll be on November the 18th, Wednesday, the third Wednesday of the month, here with Greg Tasker, former Detroit News editor and reporter and freelance writer, and of course for more than 100 years, 130 years really, there was no sweeter word in Metro Detroit than Saunders. And while it did go out of business, Morley's Candy bought the name, and there are Saunders stores, including the one here in Grosse Pointe. Finally, I'd like to remind everybody that we have our award-winning DVDs outside, 1650 to 1900, and Recollections of the Past, and the past is prologue 1900 to about 1995, it says to the present. And those two are each 30 minutes long, and the 1 hour DVD is $10 now. And then finally, our two books, Grosse Pointe Then and Now, and Grosse Pointe 1880 to 1930. So those are available on the way out. Finally, I'd like to I'd like to say Susan Hart's our new president is here, and thank her for coming. Congratulate her on her election. And then finally, I will invite our Executive Director, Maureen Devine, to come up and introduce tonight's speaker. Maureen, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Hello and welcome. Thank you all for attending the talk tonight. Bill Kennedy, Inside the Fabulous Files. I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Larry Baranski, not only because he's my husband, many of you may have known that, me already, but also because of his knowledge and experience working with the Kennedy Files. He'll be presenting an interesting and nostalgic walk down memory lane for us to enjoy tonight, and I'm sure all of you have fond memories of Bill Kennedy at the movies, or maybe of Bill Kennedy as your neighbor in Grosse Pointe. I also want to mention that Bill Kennedy's Fabulous Files, and yes, that is what he really called them, are one of the hidden gems in the collections at the Detroit Institute of Arts. So I think you're going to have a real treat tonight, see something that's rarely seen. Larry comes to us from the DIA, where he's dedicated over 30 years of his professional life to the Performing Arts Department. 20 of those years as Associate Curator of the Department of Film and Theater Collections, which includes the popular Detroit Film Theater program, and as Curator of the Paul McPharlin Puppetry Collection of rare theatrical marionettes and hand and shadow puppets. In addition, this past year, Larry has taken on a new title. Now, Director of Programs for the museum. Let me introduce you, Larry Baranski, or I'm sorry, let me welcome Larry Baranski.
This is pretty exciting because even though these photographs have been at the museum for many years now, this is really the first time that we've explored them with the public. And just a little background about that. It was part of the Performing Arts Department in the 1970s, which was very active in creating programs to try to develop new and young audiences for the Detroit Institute of Arts, including, and if you may remember, the Detroit Youth Theater, and many other programs. Detroit Film Theater was one of them. And there was a very creative man named Audley Grossman, Dr. Audley Grossman, who was the director of that program. And I was lucky enough to work in that department when he was the director. And it's because of that connection that the Bill Kennedy files actually came to the museum. Audley was friends with everyone. He knew everybody. And when Bill Kennedy retired in 1982, I think it was well known that we were also the place where the most important theatrical puppet collection in North America was stored. So Bill Kennedy made a very generous gift of the fabulous files to the Detroit Institute of Arts. At that time, I confess, I was pretty oblivious to it. Even though I had begun there in 1974, I was probably much more interested in some of the foreign language films and other activities at the museum. And I don't really recall a lot about when the files came into the building. But I do remember very distinctly, of course I grew up in Detroit, so I have very vivid memories of Bill Kennedy. And so it was pretty exciting in the early 1990s when I got a call from Bill Kennedy and asking if he could come down. He wanted to look at the files. The reason being that CKLW at that point was organizing a reunion of some of their old stars. And so I was obviously very excited, and I met him. And one problem was that the files themselves, which were these sort of green battered file cabinets circa World War II, had been locked. And dear Audley Grossman, who was no longer with us at that point, was a genius in many things. Organization was not one of them. And so nobody could find the keys. And Bill was, obviously very concerned because he wanted to look at the files again and bring some of the material onto the program with him. So I got physical with the files, and I literally took a hammer to the locks to Bill's amusement. And I was able to get him back into the fabulous files. So it was a very big memory for me. And I remember he had some advice for me. He went something to the effect of don't ever retire, which is somewhat prophetic. But he said, don't ever retire, kid, because you'll blink your eyes, 10 years have gone by, and it'll be just one big, long golf game. So it was classic Bill Kennedy. Bill Kennedy is interesting. We know a lot about his career as an actor. Of course, everyone knows about his career as a television personality, but there's very little out there about his life before the 1940s, when he started as a contract player for Warner Brothers Pictures. And so I'm not going to talk about that because I could find very little about it. But there is endless information about his career as a film star. The first thing is that he seems to have appeared in Hollywood circa the exact date is 1941. And from 1941 through 1955, he worked for Warner Brothers Studios. And because Warner Brothers had associations with RKO and Republic, he would also appear in many of those pictures. The first few images we're going to show you here are not actually from the Bill Kennedy Archive. The Bill Kennedy Archive includes very little about Bill Kennedy. other than the actual photographs from the show, which will be the highlight of this. But the actual films that Bill Kennedy appeared in are not represented in that collection, which is interesting because he appeared in more than 80 films, and that is a very impressive number by anyone's standard. Now, of course, he was not the star of these films, but he worked regularly in Hollywood. And Warner Brothers, as all the studios in those days had their profile, if you will, meaning they made a certain kind of picture. MGM, of course, would make musicals were their forte. Warner Brothers was more of a gritty studio, and they specialized in, of course, during the war, they made a lot of films on that subject. Westerns were very, very big for Warner Brothers. Crime dramas, which during the 1940s we now call film noir films, were another big item for them. But these are posters that are actually in the museum's collection, but not from the Bill Kennedy archive. And for those of you who remember the Bill Kennedy show, of course you know that he was a font of information about films. And there is a thing now on the internet called the International Movie Database, IMDb. It's sort of the virtual Bill Kennedy in my mind. So whenever anyone has a question about film, this is where we go to now. And if you go to that and just search on IMDb, you will find what we call his filmography. And so some of his earliest films, for example, Flying Fortress, and when you go there, it'll actually list his role in there, which can be very interesting. Let's see if this is going to work.
Incidentally, Larry, they're going to fly one of those over Co-America Park during the Harwell
Wrong one.
to see.
Hang on, I'm sorry.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Maureen, help me out here. Can you? You got it? Okay. Are you going to go forward on this instead of the projector, aren't you? Yep, okay. We're set.
Maureen's going to do my manual.
There we go. Yep.
It's really
Just a
interesting.
There we go. Sorry.
So Flying Fortress was a 1942 film, and right off the bat, Bill was given a role that stuck with him. He was typecast. He was the news radio announcer, which is very interesting because he was continually cast as a radio announcer because he had this wonderful voice, of course. And eventually he just became known not as an actor, but as a voice artist. Now Voyager, Mission to Moscow, all films that he has very small roles in, but what you're going to see as we go on, that he made wonderful relationships with all the actors in these films. Bill had very distinctive matinee idol looks and this deep resonant voice, but he also had a very quirky sense of humor, as we all know. And in that time, there were 5 men in Hollywood who could give you a job as an actor. Jack Warner was one of them. And really, the one explanation of why he did not become better known as an actor, my guess is that he had a very irreverent sense of humor. And this was in an era with a studio system where it was more important to follow the rules than it was to be a wise guy. So in all of these, he has very small, now all of his roles are speaking roles, so he's never an extra. He's always a bit player. Next one. This is one in which he has a significant role. He's one of Betty Davis's suitors. And here's one of the few photographs from the Bill Kennedy collection where he actually appears. Now, unfortunately, his backside is taken, so it's not that impressive. But nonetheless, there he is with Betty Davis.
He's on the left?
Yes.
So,
yes.
okay. It's real.
And this is another photograph from the DIA's photo collection, not Bill Kennedy, very indicative of Warner Brothers. It was called The Doe Girls. And once again, we have no images of him from this film. This is one, and I know many of you remember him showing this photograph. Bill Kennedy played the executioner of Ingrid Bergman and Joan of Arc, and he's the he appears right at the end of the film. He's all smeared in soot and grease, and he's throwing logs on the fire, literally. But many of these films, of course, were A-list films, and he got to know all of the actors, and I think it's really a tribute to his genuine warmth that they all remembered him in later days. Now we get a little bit into the post-war period, and where he appeared in many westerns. And this is unusual. This is one where he actually was the lead in the film. And this was a serialized western. And I do not know who Dwayne Kennedy is, and whether that's a relative or whether he's listed twice under a separate name because he appears as another character. And then the crime films. In Cry Danger, he was a very notable drunk that appeared in the film. But he was so wonderful even in small parts, and really that's the aspect about this is that it really is character actors that make the lead actors interesting, because without them, films have very little sense of life to it. He didn't do many science fiction films, which is a shame because he has that great look in a fedora, although he did appear in a number of episodes of a very famous TV serial that I will show you about in a minute. This is a film, Jack Palance, Shelley Winters, two actors who made frequent appearances on his show. Once again, all of these relationships that he formed really served him well. And this is not from the Bill Kennedy collection, but that is Bill Kennedy. This is from another wonderful photograph database called PhotoFest, that if ever you go online and you want to look up an actor, there's hundreds of thousands of photographs. And I was able to find two Bill Kennedy, so I was pretty excited. And this is Shelley Winters. And another post-war film with Ida Lupino, Dennis Morgan. And then, of course, we have what is probably his most recognized contribution to Western culture. And does anyone recognize this shot? This is, of course.
And here's the voice of it.
And the next. This is George Reeves, who was who played the original Superman, and the actor who played Perry White. And the man next who appeared as the announcer, and whose voice was heard more than 90 times in 90 different episodes. And I'm sure we could probably all do it in unison, but you know exactly what I mean. So at this point, he was becoming more and more known as a voice artist, and it was I think clear to him that it was never going to happen, that he was going to break through. By this time, he was well into middle age, and it was clear that that dream of becoming an A-list actor was probably really impractical. And so, those of us in Detroit were in many ways the beneficiary of that dashed dream, sorry to say, because Bill Kennedy came back to the Midwest. And there was a time when it was the early era of television where broadcasting changed all the rules for many people in the industry, meaning if you look at somebody like Arthur Godfrey, who was a talent who really had the power of the old studio bosses, and was able to parlay that into greater success than he ever could have enjoyed through the old Hollywood system. Bill started at CKLW in exact date is 1956, 1986. Thank you, Larry. He moved to Detroit from Windsor, and he went back and forth a little bit. He began Bill Kennedy in the movies that year, but he also still worked in a number of other, primarily television serials, until it became clear to him that this was a genuine opportunity and that he should dedicate it full time. Television in that time technically was very different than what it is now. And most stations had a very limited broadcast range, which of course limited its audience, but it also added a very local flavor to everything. And Kaiser Broadcasting, which was the producers of CKLW, would only get about to Battle Creek before you begin to lose it. So people like Bill Kennedy, or people who were smart like Bill Kennedy, very much took advantage of that local aspect of it and developed programs that really seemed like this was our neighbor. This was not some anonymous person broadcasting from New York. And I think we all began to think of people like Mary Morgan and Liebchen. I'll never forget Liebchen, her dachshund, who was on all of her shows with her. And Captain Jolly, who was also manning Toby David, another Grosse Pointe resident. Even the advertisers on these shows were well known. Mr. Belvedere, we do good work, who would make personal appearances on the show to talk about how good his work was. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back to that. But Bill was just very natural at this, and interesting how he was never used in comedy in film because he would have been perfect for it. Finally, when he had his own show, he made great use of this. And he poked fun at himself. He was very warm and friendly, but he also had this air of sophistication. He was very cultured. He was like talking to some cocktail hour sage at a lounge, and it was very, very entertaining. And of course, he had that aspect when he talked about seeming to just say whatever came into his mind. It was not scripted. It was very improvised. It was also a time in the 1950s where television synced very much with our lifestyles. Of course, baby boom generation, many families had multiple children, so the kids would get parked in the Knotty Pine TV room while Ma was cooking roast beef dinner, and it seemed like Bill was part of the family. And there's a wonderful website dedicated to Bill Kennedy. And when you read those memories, that's what comes back to you. It's like, oh yeah, I remember how comfortable it always felt. My own best memory is that Bill Kennedy was the person who introduced me to Francis the Talking Mule, which when you're an 8-year-old kid is like the most amazing thing you could imagine. But it's also important to remember that many of these films, which were made in the 1930s and 40s, were unseen for decades until television came along and introduced new generations to them, because theaters would not revive films. They were all designed to show new product. And until television began broadcasting these films, many of these things were unknown to successive generations. This is a shot of what the actual Fabulous Files looked like when they came to us. They were packed so tight that it was difficult to stick a finger in them. And at first glance, they were pretty intimidating from the prospect of wanting to process all of these, because there are certain methods that most archivists will follow. And of course, Bill broke every rule in that book. And it was in a time before many of the rules were formed. And when we went through the photographs, a very wonderful volunteer named Al Miller helped me over the course of 3 years to go through these. And we discovered there were 10,000 photographs in the cabinets. The unfortunate part is that they were all sandwiched between all this other material, which included newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, including things like this, which, if you remember, he would assemble these and then put them on camera for you to see. And he used all types of materials that, of course, are anathema to long-time storage. But we made the decision that the most important thing would be to remove the photographs, because some of the photographs were incredibly rare, and most of them were paper clipped, and the paper clips were oxidizing. This is the fabulous files now, and they're not exciting looking anymore, but nonetheless, they've been moved to these files, and they are now stored individually in these boxes that are made with acid-free material. And when you open them up, each one is individually stored in a polypropylene sleeve. And as you can see, we've developed some sort of numbering system. And here is an example of the type of problems that this collection presented. He would take these photos and he would put push pins into the corners. So the ones that he used multiple times had many, many, many holes in them. They literally would put them on a board so that the television camera could film them. And of course, at the bottom here, you have a little hand-typed note that Bill Kennedy had glued to the photograph, another problem. But he did one thing that we're very grateful for, and that is on the back of every photo, he would take a stamp that would have an automatic date, and every time it was shown on the show, he would put the date that was shown. So it's very interesting from the standpoint of when we take this farther. So far we've only processed the 10,000 photographs, but actually Wayne State University Press is now very interested in possibly doing a volume on the subject, because it represents such a wealth of material that is really unavailable anywhere else. That we now have this record of exactly when it aired on his show. This is getting into the actual collection now, and this represents the kind of really wonderful, here we have a studio portrait of Gloria Swanson, autographed. And we actually were able to take the ones that we wanted to determine whether it was an actual autograph, or sometimes the actors would have publicity photos that would have a printed autograph. And so we were able to establish that the vast majority of these were actual autographs. And I was always, did not know who Robert Herzberg could possibly be until actually just this very lecture, and I decided, because I remember in the early 1990s when we first processed these, nobody had any record or could find any reference to Robert Herzberg, but now of course, through the wonder of the internet, we were able to find out that Robert Herzberg, does someone recognize this building?
Yeah, I probably, yeah.
Robert Herzberg was a Grosse Pointe artist, and many of the rarest photographs that were autographed to Robert Herzberg. He died in 1960, so it seems that Bill was able to obtain them from his estate, or possibly, since obviously Robert Herzberg was a big movie fan, would have given them or sold them directly to Bill while he was still alive. So out of the 10,000 photographs, what I'm now going to show you are 100 photographs that were selected, not because they're the rarest or most valuable or most outrageous, because there are some amazingly outrageous photographs. We have one of Fred Astaire and Alice Cooper having dinner together. But I wanted to show you photographs that were taken directly from the set of the show. And so they, for the most part, are all guests that appeared on the Bill Kennedy show, and they are pictured with Bill himself. And they're roughly in chronological order. And out of the 100, there's 10. If everyone is interested, we can, as they did on the Bill Kennedy show, enjoyable audience participation. Many of these you'll recognize right away, but there's 10 of these. I'm not going to tell you who they are, and we'll see if you can guess who they are. So, here we go. Number 1, Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine was very much an A-list actress. She was the, actually the sister, I didn't know this, she was a British actress. She was the sister of Olivia de Havilland. Margaret Hamilton. Very interesting fact about Margaret Hamilton is that before she became known as the Wicked Witch, she was a school teacher. And after she retired from acting, she was very, very active in as being a volunteer to advocate for small animals and children, which is very much contrary to her character as the Wicked Witch. Next one. Everyone's favorite hotheads. We have Sal Mineo and Gene Krupa. This gentleman, who you may recognize, but really can't place the name, appeared in more than 120 Republic Westerns. His name is George Montgomery, and he was someone that Bill appeared with frequently.
Wasn't he married to Shore?
George Montgomery?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Lee Marvin, the original bad boy, studied violin as a young man, but got expelled too many times to actually do much with it, and appeared in the poster I showed you, I Died 1,000 Times. Of course, Jim Backus, and you'll find a number of and Jim Backus, of course, was an actor, but he was also well known as a voice artist too. And Bill had a very soft spot for voice artists. Anne Blyth. Anne Blyth was, she started as a very young actress in the 1940s. My favorite film with Anne Blyth is Mildred Pierce, where she plays the incorrigible daughter. And Tippi Hedren, of course, the woman who starred in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Now, you're, I think, getting a sense of the stature of some of the people who appeared on this show. Major networks today could never in a million years afford any of these people anymore. And yet they all came, assuming at Bill Kennedy's request to Detroit to appear on a show that had about a 200-mile broadcast radius.
Yeah.
Shelley Winters. The Lennon sisters. Now, they're all looking rather glum, staring at the phone, and you may be wondering why that's the case. And if you remember, Bill would take questions from the audience. And so some of you may even remember the phone number. Does anyone remember the phone number? Doesn't matter. Next. And another all-female group, this is the Chordettes. And the Chordettes were a teen group, and their big hit was Mr. Sandman. Cesar Romero. Cesar Romero was a Cuban-American actor and best known, I think, for the television series Batman. He appeared as the Joker. Jane Russell. Jane Russell, and also joined by Connie Haynes and Beryl Davis. Okay, here's your first quiz. Does anyone recognize this man?
Yeah.
Do we have a name for this man? Can anyone put a name to this man? You're stumped already. This is Arnold Stang.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Arnold Stang was a character actor. He was usually portrayed as the less than manly man character actor. He also became a voice artist, and he was the voice of Scooby-Doo.
Nervous Nitus.
Yeah. Oh, another one. He also appeared in a film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. They were paired together. And in the film, Arnold Schwarzenegger was called Arnold Strong, Arnold Stang. Someone recognize this one? Thank you. Thank you. Once again, a character actor primarily from the 30s and 40s. From those of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s, he was the voice that would narrate the fractured fairy tales on the Rocky and Bullwinkle show.
That's where I remember.
So you recognize this man?
Oh, yeah. Spoke very fast.
His normally when he would appear, his hair would be standing on end.
Oh, that's
And-
Dr.
Yes,
Yeah.
close. Irwin Corey.
Yep.
Yes.
Dr.
Professor Irwin Corey.
Professor.
Yeah,
That's
and
right.
he would wear a disheveled bow tie, and he would look like he was in an explosion. And, he was very funny. This is
Chris.
no,
No.
no. This is not Donald Chris. This is a gentleman named Tim McCoy, and Tim McCoy appeared in many Republic westerns, going back even to the 1930s. So, and he lived in Saginaw, Michigan. So this is just one of these wonderful photos that when I read this, I realized Bill would sit around and look up old cronies, and he would get really excited if he knew that one was actually in the area. But and this is the First Lady of
Yeah,
Michigan.
G. Man Williams, right?
Yes,
Who lived on Lakeshore.
yes. This is G. Menon Williams. So I also think this is indicative of the warmth and respect everyone had for Bill Kennedy. And this is Jeanette MacDonald, of course, the musical star, singer and actress from the 1930s, who appeared in countless films with Nelson Eddy. Peter Ustinov. Peter Ustinov. This is one where Bill doesn't actually appear, but he was on the Bill Kennedy show. Peter Ustinov, of course, was in many films, was actually a director himself, but also narrated endless documentaries and films. Yes, thank you. Very good. And he's concealing his face, so. Guy Lombardo, thank you.
London, Ontario.
The book that he's reading, which appears in a number of these, is it's Celebrities Almanac. And so Bill would pull this book out and read to the celebrity how they were listed. This is one you probably won't get. This is an actor, a Warner Brothers stock actor named George McCready, who appeared in many Western, war, and crime films.
That knows, yeah.
Next one. This man, once known as the Toastmaster General of the U.S. Georgie Jessel. And it's amazing how few films Georgie Jessel actually appeared in. He was wildly famous, disproportionate to his actual acting career. Yes, original Musketeer. Okay, here's your next test. Who is this woman?
Bewitched Mother.
I'll give you a clue. She appeared in two very important films directed by Orson Welles, Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons.
Give us a hint.
Agnes
Yeah.
Moorehead.
Thank you.
Another
Great. Agnes
Bewitched.
Moorehead.
Agnes
Agnes Moorehead. And I think that laugh was also a giveaway too, because of course she would always be handsome.
I know that's Peter, Paul, and Mary. That's
Jose Ferrer.
No,
Nope.
Mitch Miller.
Mitch Miller.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
he does it.
Are those paper clip marks?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
And
geez.
this is the problem with how they were stored is that many of them were paper clipped.
Oh, boy.
And of course, just the metal on the paper clip would draw moisture and oxidize. Now, here's a prominent Grosse Pointer, if ever there was. So I want to recognize this person. This is Mrs. Henry Ford II.
Second, it's with her mother. Yes. Is that before the divorce in 65?
Tony Martin. Sammy Davis Jr. Which and that was his manager. And often they would, Bill Kennedy would take advantage of people who were appearing, for example, at the Latin Quarter, at the Rooster Tail.
What a comb over.
Yes, Mr. Zero Mostel. Art Carney.
Yeah.
And of course,
Andy Thomas, of course, yep.
he too was a area resident.
Detroiter, yeah. Papard,
George Papard.
Before the 18th. Yeah.
No relation,
Another Ken.
Mr. George Kennedy, who appeared in the film Cool Hand Luke. I think it was his most well-known role. By the way, you've noticed the evolution of Bill's fashion sense, I think, here. And brace yourself for the 1960s. They're coming up here. But I also think that if somebody were to open a Bill Kennedy wear shop today, that I know I'd be first in line. Yes, John Cameron Swayze was the news commentator,
That's what I was thinking.
who looks like he must be 3.5 feet tall.
But the Timex is still
Yeah, that's right. The quad.
This gentleman is named Leo Carrillo, and he was a Mexican American actor, and he appeared regularly in a TV serial western called The Cisco Kid.
Oh, yeah.
And he was the sidekick, Pancho. And Bill Kennedy appeared many times as an extra on that show, too. Okay, who is this man? This is the patron saint of film exhibitors. There's a clue. We all love and admire this man. He wrote the book on showmanship in the 1950s. So you want to remember the film The Tingler? Where theater seats would be wired. It was a science fiction film with Vincent Price. No one can guess. This is William Castle. This is his name. And he was well known in the 50s for innovating things such as 3D, a thing called odorama, where and we've actually shown these films at the museum and tried to recreate the gimmicks, and it's wonderful fun.
It's almost like the evolution of the ashtray in this.
Fabian, of course, the singing sensation. Anyone? Johnny Ginger.
Johnny Ginger. Yeah. As soon as he started saying Johnny, I realized.
Yes. And Johnny Ginger was also, of course, a local television host. He had a program called Curtain Time Theater, that's how we pronounce it. And he introduced the Three Stooges to a new generation of unsuspecting children. This is Ben Gazzara. And he's with an actress named Janice Rule, who is fairly unknown. If you've ever seen the film American Flyer about bicycle racers, she played Kevin Costner's mother. Correct, yes. Who appeared in many Warner films, also appeared in Joan of Arc with Bill Kennedy. James Darren. And here we are moving into the 60s. And
Pure delay.
yes, thank you. Of course, he's is the
Wow.
actor who was the astronaut in 2001. I have no idea who the actors are, and there's no record. It simply has on the back of this photograph Tarzan. There were many Tarzans. Of course, the most famous one, Johnny Weissmuller. This is probably not him. It's much too late.
Yeah.
But of course, no one's paying any attention to him. They're all over by the big cat on Bill Kennedy's desk. And,
Oh,
Oh my
jeez.
gosh.
yeah, he's sort of hidden there. But you see, I'm imagining these are probably all the women who were in the studio who came out to pet the, I think it is a lion,
It's a
a
lion.
small lion cub.
Yeah.
Mr. Dennis Weaver,
Dennis Weaver.
who is the star of the television show Gunsmoke.
Yes.
Oh, not the star. Mel Tormel. The wonderful thing is that Bill would have these stars on, and he would be taking questions from the audience, and Bill would normally be the person to provide the answer to any question that was posed, and he would always have this little shake of his head after he had delivered the last word. It was just so classic Bill Kennedy. Joey Lewis, the singer and comedian, also likes Georgie Jessel, famous disproportionate to his talents. Does anyone recognize this very wonderful actress? Yes, thank you.
Really?
And
If I had my glasses on, I could do real good.
now,
Where's that at?
it was Bill Kennedy, and I'm not sure what the screening of this is. You can see some of the actors in it, Doug McClure, Peter Mann. But one thing that Bill Kennedy would organize from time to time is screenings at the Fox Theater of famous films such as Gone with the Wind. And I've read recollections of people who said he would go there, he would be standing up at the balcony, beaming at everyone, welcoming everyone in. And once again, this is the 1950s, 1960s. Many of these films had not been in theaters in decades. Also, presidential candidate, would-be comedian. Oh, Mr. Jack Counts.
Look at that.
And Jack was also appeared in many Warner films, primarily crime films. He was usually, and westerns, but his crime films, he was really did a good psychopath. Celeste Holm. And she appeared 5 times on his show, so I think Celeste and Bill were very, very good friends. This is George Plimpton, of course, the writer, and Forrest Tucker, better known for somewhat F Troop. Yes,
Yeah.
he was Sergeant O'Rourke on F Troop.
Yeah.
Mr. Harry Belafonte, no doubt at an early point in his career, looking fairly young. This is Hume Cronin and Jessica Tandy. And Hume has the longer filmography of the two, and is pretty much a fixture in most of Alfred Hitchcock's milestone films. Mr. George Maharis, who was well known on Route 66, the television show, and I didn't realize this, but he was also a pop singer. This is an actor named Cornell Wilde, who his probably most famous role was in The Greatest Show on Earth. Oh, I love this one.
Probably in town for a Chrysler commercial. Is that right?
Now, I think you're realizing that all of Bill's guests are grinning from ear to ear on the show. I mean, they really look like they're having fun. And I don't think it's an act. I think he made them feel very welcome. Cliff Robertson. Cliff's looking a little grim, but. Here's another. Of course, if you read a little bit about recollections of Bill as a Grosse Pointer, he really fit in well here. It seems. He drove a T-Bird and a Rolls Royce. I read where he once took his T-Bird to Grosse Pointe South, to their auto shop class, and they took it apart and couldn't get it back together. But he also had a Rolls Royce, luckily, and he had an on-air contest where if people could answer a certain number of questions, he would give them a ride in his Rolls Royce. And this is Kathy and Charlie Mutch, who won the contest to cruise around with Bill in his Rolls Royce.
Looks like they're having dinner at the Golden Lion.
Is that the Golden Lion? 7 Mile
That's
Man?
in Grosse
Yeah.
Pointe
Is it?
restaurant.
Yep.
It could be.
Sure looks like it. Looks like it, yeah.
Next
looks
one.
like it. I thought it was.
Also known as Milton Suppman was his
His real name.
his birth name. Next one. And this was a little stunt that Milton Suppman arranged for Bill Kennedy when he appeared. And yes, that is Bill on the left there receiving the pie in the face. Mr. Jerry Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
Very gentleman.
Mayor Kavanaugh.
I remember seeing the show, and it was really frightening for some reason, but we don't really know who the woman is, but Bill is demonstrating his hair plugs.
Oh, jeez. Which obviously later didn't take because some of the hair pieces he has
No.
on.
Yeah. In any case, I do remember seeing this on the show.
Read it
No,
No.
this is a very well-known actress.
The Munsters.
Yes, Yvonne DiCarlo.
Yes, okay.
Who also appeared in the Ten Commandments.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
Yvonne DiCarlo had a very long career. She actually began appearing in the 1930s in films. And here's a gentleman who is still acting.
Yeah.
He appeared in the Larry Sanders Show, Jeffrey Tambor.
Oh, yeah.
At this time, he was better known as he appeared on Kojak.
So we're now into leisure suits, so this is the
Yeah.
70s? This is in the 1970s by this time?
And the decor of a set changed constantly.
Yeah.
It's you can see there's some keen, big-eyed portraits on the show. Mr. Tony Randall. This is a actress, June Ellison, who appeared primarily in musicals. Probably her best role was in the Glenn Miller story. Bill appeared with this woman in a film called State Fair. This is Virginia Mayo. And the great cat in the shades there, who's hanging over Bill, was also an actor named Michael O'Shea, who was not very well known, but was married to Virginia Mayo. This is one of the only personal photographs I was able to find of Bill Kennedy, and it's identified back as at a friend's wedding. And the woman that Bill's sitting next to is his wife. But this is it, really. No childhood photos, no recollections. Can anyone name this excellent ukulele player? No, not Don Howard. No, this is Ponce Ponce. That's his name. And he appeared on a television show called Hawaiian High. Which was
okay.
the predecessor to Hawaii 5-0. And Roy Rogers. See, Bill got into the spirit of things. This is interesting because these were some small color photographs. Of course, most of us watched this on black and white television, having no idea that the set was actually painted colors. Jimmy Dean and some bunnies from the Playboy Club who visited the set. This rather somber man is a Spanish ventriloquist named Senor Wences.
Oh, God, yeah. The hand, that's all right, yeah. Yeah, the hand puppets.
And this is Howard Keel, the very well-known singer who appeared in many musicals, Roger and Hammerstein films. And this is actually Hal Miller, the volunteer that helped me identify many of these people, insisted this was a woman named Penny Edwards. And there's no record anywhere of any actress named Penny Edwards that I was able to find. And I insisted that this was Edie Adams, just based on the fact that she has some, small cigar type thing in her hand.
There you go.
And it actually looks like Edie Adams too, but I have no proof. And Hal will never give up on insisting that it's Penny Edwards. Henry Mancini, of course, probably one of the most important film score writers, certainly after the post-war period. Does anyone recognize this man?
Roman Polanski.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is very surprising because, of course, there was no way Bill Kennedy could have known Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski was a Polish Jew who spent most of his early part of his career in Europe. But this was probably about the time that Rosemary's Baby was released. He was the director of that film. And, of course, Vincent Price. Vincent Price, who was visited Detroit regularly, was also, over the years, came to the Detroit Institute of Arts many times because, of course, Vincent Price was an amateur artist and art collector.
Now, is that a fake mustache?
It would look more natural if it was fake, I'm assuming. So I'm assuming it's real.
No, that's real, okay.
And this is
Fairbanks. Yeah.
that was Fairbanks Jr.
Always had a tan in his later years.
Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Well, and of course, Douglas Fairbanks Sr. Was probably the most important, one of the most important people in the establishment of the Hollywood industry in general. And a little bit of trivia, United Artists was a company that began with Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford and Charlie Chaplin. They were the United Artists. So this is his son. And this is Harold Robbins, the writer Harold
You see the
Robbins,
books in the front
best
there.
known for his somewhat risque novels, many of which that were turned into films. Probably his biggest seller was a book called The Carpetbaggers. And this is Roger Miller, the singer Roger Miller. Looking a little goofy, but I guess that's keeping in character. Can anyone tell me who this person is?
The Odd Couple, the other.
No, it's not Walter Matthau.
Oh, it's not. Well, no. But from the TV program,
Oh, Klugman, Jack Klugman.
Yes, yeah. From the,
Wrong again.
No, wrong again. No kidding. Okay, good.
This is probably one of the most famous country western stars.
Oh, really? Jeez.
In the
Okay.
last 50 years,
No idea.
that almost no one recognizes it. His name was Ferlin Husky.
That's great name.
And as you can see, Isaac Hayes.
Oh yeah.
Red Skeletons. And of course, Red Skeleton.
Oh jeez. Rip Taylor.
Whose talent I've never been able to
They both have
understand.
good toupees on.
Yeah, it's true.
Artie Shaw. No.
Henry Gibson.
Gibson
Yeah.
just died.
Henry Gibson began as a protege of Jerry Lewis, of all things. And of course, became best known on the 60s television show Laughing.
He just died yesterday or today.
Jane Powell, who starred in many, many MGM musicals. Barbara Hershey, 60s films, and also she played opposite David Carradine in the TV series Kung Fu. And this is a woman who just died last year. It was a very highly regarded folk singer. His name was Odetta.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. That's not who I thought
The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
McCallum, yeah, that's right. You know his character name.
And also appeared on my favorite show, The Outer Limits. As he appeared as a person who evolved over the course of a week, and he grew a giant brain and 6 fingers.
There's that mustache again.
It's kind of a dolly.
Yeah.
This is Catherine Crosby,
Yeah, Bing Crosby's right.
and she was also a staple in many Alfred Hitchcock films. She appeared in Rear Window. This woman has one of the wildest filmographies you can read. High School Confidential was her first big hit, Mamie Van Doren.
Oh,
And of course she was well past her prime by this time. It was primarily the 1950s when she was the most popular. Anyone recognize this woman?
Redgrave.
Yes, Lynn Redgrave. And this is right about the time that the film Tom Jones appeared. And, yes, Vanessa.
her sister.
And the next one. Can anyone tell me who this is?
Morris the cat.
Thank you. This is Morris the cat.
So the gentleman with him is nobody, or is that his manager, or what?
That is his trainer.
Trainer, yeah. That's funny. What kind of questions did he
You know,
ask you?
it's TV studios. Obviously, there's lights, there's strange people. So obviously, to get the cat to do this was pretty good. And finally,
Oh, Jane
Jane
Mansfield.
Mansfield. And this is probably compositionally, from a just aesthetic standpoint, one of the best ones in the collection, because you just there's this triangle of stairs here, where the dog's looking at Bill, and Bill's looking at the dog,
Now, is that paperclip marks all the way down the edge
yes.
here? Oh,
Yeah.
jeez.
And there's not a
And
lot
holes
you
in the
can
corners.
do to repair them when they're like that.
Yeah.
But of course now it's possible to touch things up
Yeah.
digitally.
Yes.
But when you think about it, it's better just to have the paperclip marks there, because then it preserves the history of it, I think. Those are my 100 best photos from the Bill Kennedy out of 10,000. It wasn't an easy job to find the best, but there they are. Bill retired from Bill Kennedy at the Showtime in 1982. For a while, he was actually would film a few episodes from his home in Florida, Palm Beach. He died in 1997. And in retrospect, when you look at his career, there are a few A-list actors who had this wonderful second chapter to their lives as he did. And so in looking at these photos and in looking at all the films he appeared in, all the friends he made, the wonderful career he had after his somewhat failed career as a film star, you can't help but think he really was a smart guy. Here he was living in this beautiful community. Everyone knew him, and certainly had wonderful feelings for him. And in fact, he lives on, even today. 2 years ago, the New York Times ran, on their Sunday edition, they have a full-page illustrated feature called The Funny Pages. And they employ really, really talented graphic artists to recreate the golden age of the Hearst papers, Crazy Cat, Gasoline Alley from the 1920s, which were really beautiful works of illustration art. This is an illustrator whose name is Seth, and these appeared in the New York Times 2 years ago. And it's set in a unnamed mythical Midwestern border town and a television station, CKCK. And here, these are panels that appeared in the New York Times, and here's the viewer's guide. And here we have, does everyone remember the Friendly Giant?
Oh, yeah.
He's now Busy Bob Shoebox. And the gentleman in the lower left, of course, is
George Perot.
George Perot.
He's sleeping. He's sleeping in that scene?
And, and Fred Kennedy.
Oh, look at that.
Next one, please.
Wow.
This is a series, the whole series was actually about George Perot, and it was the series, you can find it online, and it's very interesting because it's all about Detroit and Windsor. And it's called George Sprott. It's not George Perot. But this is a wonderful panel showing, and this is sort of indicative of how the legends of George Perot and Bill Kennedy really spread like dandelion seeds. Next one. And of course, Fred Kennedy, who was interviewed about his association with George Sprott.
Picking up his discards.
So in closing, I would highly recommend that the Grosse Pointe Historic Society at some point put Bill Kennedy's former home on a tour of Grosse Pointe stars. I think it really deserves and has earned it. And I guess that's it. If anyone has any questions about the Bill Kennedy fabulous files or archives, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Yes, sir.
Do you know where he's buried?
In Florida. Yes.
And he lived on, we were just talking, was it Clairview?
He lived, I actually have information here.
Hillcrest. Oh, Hillcrest, not far? Okay, not far.
Hillcrest and Beaupre.
Oh, very good. Okay, so not far.
And I tried to go to Google Earth to give you an aerial view of his home, but it wouldn't let me print it out. So.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions?
Very good.
Thank you all very much for
Well,
coming.
thank you, Larry.